I'm Frank Brill, editor of EnviroPolitics. I have a wonderful guest today, Jeff Tittel, former director, principal. What was your title there?
Director, yeah.
Director of the New Jersey Sierra Club, and a man who was all things environment. And you didn't, when the environment was a really hot issue in the past, over 20 or 30 years. There was no issue that didn't rise to the surface, but involve Jeff Tittel. And he established a wonderful reputation for himself as somebody who was not only knowledgeable about all the issues, but did a wonderful job in bringing them across to the people, and especially the legislators and committee hearings and things like that. So with that as a preview, Jeff, let me dig into a couple of the questions I have for you here today. And by the way, thank you very much
Oh,
for
and
being
thank you
here.
for having me on.
You're welcome. Now let's start at the very beginning, pretty much, with your childhood. Where were you born? In New Jersey, I take it.
Yeah, I was born in Newark and raised in Hillside, though my family had a cabin up in the mountains in Ringwood. And so at an early age, I could actually see the differences in the environment. And where I grew up on the Newark Hillside border, there was a stream. And some days it was purple, and some days it was lime green, and you could throw matches at it and it flares up. And then when I went up to Ringwood, you could drink the water out of the streams. You'd see fish in it, and so from an early day, I saw the impact of pollution and development to the environment.
Now, your early education, where did you get that?
So Hillside was where I grew up, and I was in school there. I just had my 50th high school reunion. And the irony is, when I was in high school and junior high, for the first Earth Day, I organized a stream cleanup of the Elizabeth River in seventh grade. And my first political lesson was when I went to the principal about getting rakes and shovels. She said she's had a hard time getting a hold of the DPW. Well, I knew the Democratic chair, Charlotte DeFilippo, and I called her up and I said, can we get rakes and shovels for this, from the DPW? And she said, can the mayor come? I said, sure. Will it be press? I said, the Hillside Times, you'll get whatever you need. And that was my first political lesson on the environment when I was about
Really lessons. And
14 years old, 13 years old.
all you had to do is wash, rinse, and repeat, huh?
Yeah,
After that, you
exactly.
used a lot of the same tactics. Um, what was your first, big time environmental activism experience?
Um, Probably protesting as a child with my parents, Storm King Mountain and the building of the pump storage station that Robert Moses wanted to do on the Hudson River. My parents and grandparents were very active hikers and outdoors people. The camp that we ran up in Ringwood was run by volunteers, and to be a member, you had to be sort of a trade unionist and environmentalist, and everybody was really big into hiking. There's wonderful hiking trails. And I think that was probably the first, time because, and actually it was a victory. It was a famous case, Sierra Club versus New York Power Authority, that stopped the blowing up of Storm King Mountain for this pump storage power plant. And so that was, I think, my first activity, environmentally. On my own, was when I was in junior high, fighting Route 78 through the Watchung Reservation, putting it right through the middle of the county's only kind of wilderness area.
Mhm. And Jeff, what kind of influences did you have at this point in your life that may have played a role in where you were going? Although it sounds to me like you were on a path, nonetheless. Were there any college professors or writers or others who had a big influence on you at the time?
There were a lot of different people. I mean, a lot of writing. I mean, my dad, was a big influence because he was an avid hiker. At 70, he could still out hike me. Um, and, he made me read Rachel Carson, when I was, a kid as soon as I could. So he was a big influence. Other people were actually, when I was 18, I was put on the Hillside Planning Board, and the wise old chairman, who was 45 at the time, Nate Friedman, said to me, kid, if you screw up here, it's going to take 40 years at least for the town to fix it. And the other piece of advice he gave me was, if you can't figure out the logic, kid, it's corruption. And, there are a lot of other people that were very influential with me. My next door neighbor up in the mountains, David Schwartzman was a professor at Howard in geology and environmental sciences, and so he'd take us hiking and teach us all about nature programs because the camp had a nature program. We'd learn, bird species, plant species, all about the different ecosystems. And then I come back to Newark and Hillside and see all the ecosystems destroyed. In fact, besides the stream, when there's a foundry in Irvington used to be running their blast furnace, I could write my name on my dad's car. So, those are kinds of the things that, really stuck with me as a child growing up. But also the fact that you can fight and do things and win. And one of my biggest and I think most successful campaigns started out back in the 80s when I was working a lot on political campaigns running around the country. I worked for Walter Mondale and Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles, and others. I was up in Ringwood, and a friend of mine at the gym was telling me about all these proposals for development that were happening in Ringwood. And I went to a planning board meeting, and the town engineer told the developer it would be cheaper to pipe the stream and put the road on the stream than to have to cut it into the side of the mountain. And I got up and I asked the question saying, well, that's a stream, that's a trout stream, it goes into the reservoir, don't you need to get state permits? And he just looked at me and said, who the hell are you to ask? And I'm like, like a resident? And that kind of got me angry and got me active.
Wow. He would soon to learn who'd ask that question of. Jeff, most of us know about you from your years in testifying in the New Jersey legislature before the environmental committees and elsewhere. Looking back, how did you, I guess you did it maybe unconsciously, but maybe consciously, how did you present yourself before the legislature? What was your plan in doing testimony?
Well, my plan was twofold. The plan was to take a complicated issue and try to explain it in an easy way for people and legislators to understand. And the second point was to be a strong advocate for my position and not saying, well, you can look at this way or that way. This is how you look at it. This is the purpose of it. And to leave them with a quote or soundbite that sticks with them. Because, it's so easy for, people to get into word salad and go all over the place. And at the time they're done with their testimony, no one knows what they really said. And so I had like a 3-minute rule, try to say it in a quick and an insightful way that explains it, but also leaves them with something they're going to have to remember.
Very good. Well, I can remember your testimony, and you definitely stuck to that plan very often and successfully. You also were known at the time for your use of, we could put it, or your assistance to the media. And that was a wonderful thing for you. They would call you all the time. If it was an environmental issue, you were the guy that got called, right?
Well, not only did they call me, actually, what people never realize that most of the stories that I got quoted in, I gave the reporters. And that's why they quoted me, because I was the person who people from DEP would drop off, little packets of information of something not good going on, or I was like the lead organizer on a bill or an issue. And so I would, kind of, call them up and explain the issue and then pitch the story to them and get them to do it. Or I would leak them the information that I got from a third party, whether it was from the legislative staff or a DEP or some other agency, to give them the story. Or I would be the first one in because, and I'm not trying to take away from anybody else, but I'm an avid reader. So I'm reading the Federal Register. I'm reading, the state. I got the state register, for rule proposals, every 2 weeks. Most people never even subscribe to it. And the first thing I would do when I get it, I go to it to see what rules are being proposed or what permits they're going to be going out to give. And there's something bad, I catch it just like all the bills I read. So for instance, Sam Peshin, who, they gave me their Lifetime Achievement Award, Friends of Liberty State Park. I read through the 250-page bill a couple of years ago on the budget, and near the bottom, under inter fee transfers, was a little paragraph that was going to privatize Liberty State Park. Now, no one else found it. No legislator knew about it. Some OLS staffer put it in there, but no one else knew it. I was the one who found it, just like I found the time when they were trying to let the Meadowlands Commission take over Liberty State Park. That was also buried in a bill. So the point is, I'm an avid reader, and I read the register. I read all the proposed rules. When I read a rule, instead of the stuff that explains the rule from DEP, I read the rule first, get my own opinion of it, then go back and read it again in more detail, and then I read their side of it because they tend to want to, look. One time DEP said to me the sky was blue. Well, I was in Newark when it turned pink because they were burning iodine in the Newark
I
incinerator,
remember that.
and I was one of the ones who blew the whistle on that.
Yeah, that's great. Um, you, I often thought of you that you seem to have a grasp of so many different issues. And back in the heydays of environmental
Oh yeah,
activism, there were so many bills coming. They were flying through the legislature. It was very
right.
difficult to keep up with all of it. I know a frustrated lobbyist who often was on the other side of you said,
Mhm.
I'd say, how does Tittel keep up with all this? He says, he makes up most of it, So I guess that was a backhand compliment. I don't know, but
Right. Well, actually, there's two pieces to it. One, I am a big reader, and secondly, I had help. The Sierra Club. Then we had a legislative committee that had people on it who were lawyers, and some were former members of OLS. And once a month, we would sit down with all the proposed bills that were coming out that had anything to do with environment or transportation or housing, and we'd sit there and we'd read them and we'd get comments. So many times when I went to testify, I already had my comments written, or at least an outline of them. And that was something I don't think people understood, that, yeah, I did my homework and I had other people help me do that homework.
yeah, you're right. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. How did you come up with the positions? Was the Sierra Club very much involved in creating those positions, or were you just creating
Well,
them for them?
that committee was a could take positions for the club without going to the executive committee. And I
Mhm.
always said we always worked to consensus when everybody agreed with me.
Okay. Um, During your legislative history, what are some of the memorable? Are there one or more memorable victories that you
Oh,
think
yeah.
about?
There are a lot. I mean, I think the biggest ones, and I may go on a little bit because,
It's all
and
right.
proud of it, but, the biggest one had to be the Highlands Act.
Mm.
Getting Governor McGreevey to agree to move forward with it. And there's a cute little backstory. I was having a fight with Brad Campbell over land use and permits, and I was having a meeting with Eric Shuffler in the governor's office, and Governor McGreevey walked in and said to me, the 2003 elections were coming up, midterms, and he said to me, "What can I get? What can I do to get you back in the team and be supportive and not, attack me every day?" And I said, "Do the Highlands Act." And he said, "Okay, we could
Wow.
do that." Anyway, so that probably, and the fact that that happened wasn't because of me, it was because of the years I spent with others fighting all these developments throughout the Highlands region, whether it was in Ringwood or Jefferson Township or Holland Township or along the Musconetcong and the Ramapo Mountains and around Morristown. And we built a network, in about 30 or 40 towns of local people fighting development. And that pressure got many of the towns to support the act because they were tired of the battles.
Mm.
And people don't realize that when the Highlands Act passed, and I don't think it would pass the same way today, that close to 50% of the towns passed resolutions in favor of the law because they were tired of being sued by developers. And 6 out of 7 Republican senators from the Highlands region voted for the bill, and one, Robert Martin from Morris County, was a co-sponsor with Bob Smith. And so you have to understand that we worked to have a broad-based coalition of people up there. And one of my favorite stories, going back to Ringwood, I was head of the Ringwood Environmental Commission and Planning Board, and I got thrown off by the mayor, Canisi. He said there are too many environmentalists on it. So this was in 1994. And in 2002, we had the first hearing for the Highlands Act up in Ringwood. That's where I wanted to have it. And Bob let me, and we had about 600 people there, all in support of the act. And Walt Davidson, who was a mayor and a friend, turned to Canisi and said, "See, you stopped him from just trying to save part of Ringwood. Now he's trying to save the whole Highlands. So when the developers complain about the Highlands Act, it's on you because you fired Jeff Tittel, and Jeff Tittel came back with a vengeance."
That'll teach them. Jeff, it was an exciting time in the legislature when there were so many environmental issues and new
Yeah,
legislation coming through, and for your side, most of it got,
yeah,
or an awful lot of it got
yeah.
adopted. So much so that I think maybe part of the problem that there doesn't seem to be much going on today is that you accomplished so much during those
No,
years.
I actually think we accomplished a lot, and then there was the backlash. In a very short period of time, we passed the Highlands Act, the Clean Car Bill, the solar program. We got the C1 stream program in place, the 300-foot buffers in place, the electronic recycling bill, the fertilizer bill. I was one of the major movers of banning indoor smoking. And so we had so many series of victories, open space funding. We had so many series of victories that the other side then decided to really organize against us. And then we started seeing things, especially under Christie, going the opposite direction. I should also mention Saving Petty's Island and flood hazard rules and a whole range of things, not just legislative, but regulatorily. And we stopped a lot of bad projects. And so the other side really got organized and really spending money, especially at the end of Corzine and under Christie, where they rolled back some of those rules and they really blocked any effort in the legislature to move forward with things going forward, with things on the environment. And so that really was a counter. We had like a green revolution, and that was a counter revolution. I was hoping that under Murphy, that there would be a reawakening, like a Prague Spring or whatever you want to call it, of the environment. And it seemed like he really didn't pick up on the environment and didn't really care. I'll tell you this, that every time I used to try to talk to him on the environment, he would always change the subject to people we both knew in Washington, D.C. that we worked with or were friends with. And I don't think he ever really cared. And I'll be blunt. Sean LaTourette is the worst environmental commissioner of my lifetime. And I've known every environmental commissioner. When I was 13 years old, I met Richard Sullivan, who gave me an award for the first Earth Day. And, I worked a lot on the environment during the Byrne administration with Jerry English, who I'm still friends with. And we've seen really an environmental justice bill that doesn't apply to anything. We saw the wind program becoming too big, too expensive, and too greedy. So that ended up basically almost imploding. We have not seen any major legislation, either in climate change or in any environmental area. And I think part of it is because as a Democrat, people think he's good on the environment when he's not, and he doesn't care. And then you've got Sean LaTourette, who was the first corporate lobbyist to ever be DEP commissioner. When he worked for Gibbons, there were 20 or 30 different polluters and people who have applications in front of DEP that he did work for, BASF and Ciba-Geigy, DuPont, the Gibbstown LNG facility, and the list goes on. And because of how he is, a lot of people are afraid of him, and no one wants to stand up. And the reason the environment is not an issue right now under Murphy is because the environmentalists didn't make it an issue. Do you think that Jim McGreevey really wanted to do all those things he did? Well, he did, but he also needed to get pushed. I always tell the story. It's one of my favorite organizing stories. Back in 1935, 36, Franklin Roosevelt had a meeting with A. Philip Randolph and Jane Austen and Walter Reuther and a bunch of other progressives. And he said to them at the end of the meeting, this was on Social Security, "You have my support, now make me do it." And that's the problem, is that we're waiting for the government to tell us what they want to do on the environment versus us telling the government what we need and then building the political and environmental campaign to get it done. Right now, I feel like it's an old line. It's not mine. It's Peter Page's when he worked for Bob Shin, said, it's not that these groups are corrupt. They just want to get to the meeting where they get screwed. And that's, sort of how I feel. I'm sort of frustrated. And one of the reasons I'm staying active is because we're not moving the ball. We have too many Zoom chair warriors who have Zooms with each other and not go out where we need to be to fight to get the environmental victories that we need to move the state forward and to protect people's health, safety, and the environment.
Well, Jeff, I think you have to concede that environmentalists have run into a bad trend at the national level, and people in general, it bears it out in polling, are not as interested in the environment as they were at one time.
Right, but again, the reason that the environment was an issue at one time is the environmentalists were out there putting out, fires, fighting this development or fighting this polluted site, or they wanted to put incinerators off the coast and raising that profile. If you want the environment to be a political issue in an election, you got to make it an issue, and you have to have demands. And I go back to when I started out. So I always like to use this story as well. In 1972, Richard Nixon vetoed the Clean Water Act. 250,000 people showed up in front of the Capitol in October. 25,000 people. I was one of the 250,000 people, by the way. 25,000 people stayed there to lobby. Later that week, the Senate overrode presidential veto on the Clean Water Act, 94-2. That's because we went to the streets. We had power. The early days of the environmental movement is where the environmentalists have to go back to. You know, back in 1970, we had the first Earth Day, and we had cleanups, but we also had speeches. I went to see, after I got done cleaning up the Elizabeth River, down to Philadelphia to hear Senator Gaylord Nelson talk about the environment and environmental legislation like NEPA that was just moving forward to become law, and the Endangered Species Act, which took time, and the Clean Water and Clean Air Act. So my point being is that that's what we did. And then in 71, we had the dirty dozen, where we targeted politically 12 of the worst polluting Congress people and defeated 7 of them, including the Democratic House whip, who was the number 3 in the House. So again, you got to get out there and you got to do stuff. You're not going to get it by saying, oh, Trump's terrible and he's doing this and that. You got to get to the people and explain why what he's doing is going to impact their health and their families and their lives. You got to bring it to the kitchen table.
Well, you've done this has been a wonderful interview. I've learned a lot, and I think others will who see it. One big question remains here, and that is, what lies ahead for Jeff Tittel?
Well, I'm getting more and more active. I'm helping, in about a dozen places around the state. Whether it's helping, fight a warehouse for luxury yachts in Liberty State Park, or someone wanting to put a 500-foot tower, a communications tower, in the middle of the Ramapo Mountain Reserve, or development that's happening in Monmouth County in a bunch of places, or a warehouse over by Phillipsburg and Lambertville itself. We have major issues with PFAS pollution in our wells, and the area where the lower income people live in town, and Hovnanian wants to build 200-unit development. So I'm staying active. I feel that we have to go back into the grassroots and build back up from, again, it's not going to happen at the top down. It's not going to happen, because of because of bad things happening. We have to go out and organize and get back to basics and really get the people back in tune, and then use that pressure again, not only at the national level or at the town level, but at the state house, so we can start trying to push bills, like the Superfund climate bill, to make polluters pay for the chronic flooding and the amount of work and money towns will have to put up to raise roads, or to armor plate sewer plants, or other things that are coming out of climate change. We need to move a bill like that. We need to move many more bills, but we need to get active and build those bases back.
Well, you laid out a roadmap for your fellow environmentalists that it's not going to be easy, but at least you're telling them what they should be doing. I totally agree with you. At any rate, Jeff, you've given a lot of your time here today and insights, and I really appreciate it.
Sure.
And I hope we'll get you back here later on another
Absolutely.
occasion.
I'm available, and there's a lot of issues that I'm working on, and I would be glad to help in any way I can. And the more you can get the message out to people, and the more they hear, the more they learn, and the more they do.
Terrific. Well, thanks for today, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.